Kate Milafalcha. Welcome back to part 3 of our conversation with author Larry Jordan about his wonderful book, The Real Marilyn Monroe. Welcome back, Larry.
Thank you.
Nice to talk to you again after so long.
I enjoyed it.
We last ended our conversation. Oh, wait, before we get into it, I almost forgot. Duh. You had something you'd like to show.
Yes, we've been talking about this big book, 768 pages, 7 by 10, I should say. And I realize that some people are daunted by the prospect of reading a book that big, or maybe they're just not that into Marilyn, but they're curious about how she died. So this is my latest book that just came out a few days ago. And I basically took the chapters of the big book, put them in this one. It covers the last months of her life and her death. There is some new reporting based on March 2025 declassified documents, and there are some rare pictures. By the way, I forgot to mention on previous occasions, this is available also in an audiobook in addition to an ebook and a printed book.
Do you narrate it?
No.
Oh.
I have a different announcer for that. It's totally professional. So there you go. There's
I
a
always
picture.
thought that'd be a cool job.
One of the pictures is something that is unique. It's a picture of Marilyn taken before the autopsy. And I defend putting that in the book because a very big author that's enjoyed lots of success put a horrible picture in his book that was taken after the autopsy in which she had been disfigured. And that's now all over the internet. But what I just showed you shows her in peaceful repose. She's not wearing any makeup and she's still beautiful. It's a very heart-rendering picture.
I have to say that critical acclaim and becoming well known for things are not always a measure of quality.
Yeah.
Really, you know what I mean?
Very true.
Yeah. To keep that, I keep telling myself that. Anyway. Okay, let's get going here. We last left off the story on late Saturday, August the 4th, at Marilyn's house when there was a sudden guest appearance of Peter Lawford and the AG. And the question is, what was their purpose in coming? And the question you put was, if they came to bully her or intimidate her, or did they just come to get that diary?
Well, first of all, let's start with some basic facts if I can get my teeth working here. If it had been a good reason for stopping, I'm sure the AG would have phoned her or had an associate phone her and say, I'm going to be in California. I'd like to stop by and see you. But he deliberately sprung a surprise by showing up unannounced at Marilyn's door.
Yeah, that was kind of a low blow.
And that was to put her on the defense to begin with. Physical intimidation was his specialty. This is a guy that has gotten in barroom brawls. On one occasion, he wanted to buy a round of drinks for a bar he was in. We're talking about the Attorney General of the United States.
This is very depressing.
And he started cheering for a different birthday boy. He was so incensed, he grabbed a beer bottle and smashed it over the head of one of the patrons. He got into another fight in a bar and smacked the guy on the mouth. This guy was suffering from his little Napoleon complex.
Yeah, he had
his older
anger
brother
management problems.
He was appearing in newspapers prior to Marilyn's death because he had decreed that all members of the cabinet had to get okays before talking to the press and review with him personally what they were going to tell the press about their departments. There was a massive revolt among members of the president's cabinet over this intrusion and overextension. So he was being portrayed in the press as a bully. And he definitely demonstrated that when he showed up unannounced to intimidate Marilyn. The reason for his timely visit was that two columnists had made oblique references to an affair with him and Marilyn on 2 successive days. Earl Wilson on Thursday of that week and Dorothy Kilgallen on Friday.
Friday.
So it suddenly elevated this matter to the public consciousness. And Marilyn had even summoned her publicist, Pat Newcomb, to her house late in the day on Friday, and Pat had spent the night there. So by Saturday morning, people were upset.
And
So-
incidentally, Dorothy Kilgallen felt terrible after the fact. She felt somewhat responsible, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Yeah, it's
We can
terrible.
go into that kind of sequentially what happened.
Anyway, Hoover talked to the older brother for a lengthy time. You mentioned like 4 hours, and told him, no uncertain terms, no more Marilyn Monroe.
Well, let's clarify. It was not based on that. It was based on the totality of his womanizing. The number one complaint was about Judith Campbell, who was simultaneously dating the president and a mobster, Sam Giancana. It was a courier between the two. And that was documented. But the arrogance of the top man, the president, and the AG were just unbelievable.
Yeah, they really, yeah. Marilyn's response to the situation, I think you put it this way, it was like, oh yeah, no more married men for me.
Yeah.
Too
No more
complicated.
no more MM for MM. No more married men for Marilyn Monroe.
But she was finding her personal strength. It was really, really noticeable, I think. After Bowling's way in, the AG sent Eunice and Jeffries out, sent them away so that they could.
Norman Jeffries was the handyman who was on Marilyn's payroll, drawing weekly payroll checks. He was not just an on-call guy. He had been working on installing new tile in the kitchen. And that's another reason why plumbing was turned off in her bathroom. She had access to another bathroom on her property. But anyway, Norman Jeffries and Eunice Murray were told to scram. And Peter Lawford handed them some change and told them to go buy some Cokes. So they got in Norman Jeffries' pickup truck and went to a nearby store and killed some time for about an hour. Notable was that Pat Newcomb was present when the AG, whom she had a crush on and was in love with, according to Jean Martin and others, Jeannie Martin, Dean Martin's wife, she was physically present when this was going on, when the AG and Lawford were at Marilyn's house unannounced, and the AG was traumatizing her, threatening her, swearing at her, manhandling her,
pushing her around,
bruising her as physical bruises, fresh physical bruises demonstrated, and as were picked up on wiretap.
I was just gonna say Otash actually had the recordings.
I shouldn't actually say wiretaps.
Surveillance.
Wiretaps kind of implies telephone. They were on her telephones, but he actually had her home bugged. So everything that woman said in her private life, morning, noon, and night, was susceptible to being intercepted by electronic surveillance. And they would even park a van down the street a little bit.
And this guy was Hoffa's spy.
Pardon me?
This guy, Otash, particularly, was Hoffa's spy?
Well, he was a guy that was an ex-police officer, and he was known as a fixer around Hollywood. He helped Lana Turner out of a jam or two, and he also worked with Confidential magazine, which had like 3 million subscribers and that told the dirt on the celebrities. And he would either get paid by them for a salacious story, or he would first go to the celebrity and offer them the story, and he would suppress it if they paid him. So I wouldn't attest to his high moral principles, but the bottom line is he did do work, and it's bona fide, for Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamsters president, who was being harassed, maybe we haven't made that clear enough, by the Attorney General and the president, but they had a bone depicted with him anyway, and also Howard Hughes. So Marilyn was under surveillance not only by them, but also the FBI. And we presented earlier in our conversations.
CIA and
Marilyn
Giancana.
became of interest when she befriended back in 1951 the young senator who ended up being president. Dates that far back.
Well, when Otash went into her house to bug it, he discovered it was already bugged.
Yes.
So they've got these tapes originally after her death, and Lawford destroyed them. But what was heard on the tapes were things like the Attorney General yelling about where's the diary, and the sounds of scuffling and searching. He offered Marilyn money. How much would you take, if you gave it to me? And her yelling, get out of here. And then their real motivation, you said, was that it's not that they were afraid she was going to have a press conference. It was afraid that diary would fall into the wrong hands.
Very important point that people have missed. Their concerns were legitimate because that week in Dorothy Kilgallen's column, she referenced a photograph that was taken when Marilyn had visited the Calneva Lodge 2 weeks before her death, not 1 week before her death. She was at home 1 week before her death, contrary to whatever they reported. So they knew. And wiretaps, I didn't mention this before verbally, but it is in my books. The FBI knew that Sam Giancana was trying to use Marilyn to blackmail the two brothers.
Right.
So they were on high alert that she was radioactive from that standpoint. They were fearful that not that Marilyn was going to disclose her diary or hold a press conference. That was a later day invention by an unscrupulous wannabe author, Bob Slater, years later. They had legitimate concerns that something was going to happen where somebody would get a hold of it. And they had real reasons for that, because 3 days after Marilyn was killed, I'll just say it that way, killed, Judith Campbell had her apartment broken into by two men that scaled up onto a balcony and entered an unlocked doorway. This was observed by an FBI agent who was keeping Judith Campbell, who, by the way, was one of the president's mistresses, under surveillance. He radioed headquarters and he was told, go ahead and let them do that, but get the license plate. The FBI ran the plate number, found out that it belonged to two young men who were the sons of a former FBI agent who was then working for General Dynamics, who was up for a big defense contract against a competitor. And all that was stolen in that break-in of Judith Campbell's apartment 3 days after Marilyn died were her phone records. They didn't touch her jewelry or any other item of value. Subsequently, the president signed off against the wishes of the Defense Department, etc., on awarding the contract to General Dynamics, which was on a plane that was a boondoggle and was ultimately canceled after he died. So you can see how somebody used leverage, blackmail leverage about a woman that was not Marilyn, but it was 3 days after Marilyn was killed. So and there were other instances that preceded this, and they'd been warned by J. Edgar Hoover in that 4-hour conversation that other authors say was just a few minutes, but it was in the residence, the private White House residence between J. Edgar Hoover and the president. And I mentioned the date. I give you down to the minute, based on Secret Service logs, when this occurred, when he was warned to be careful about this stuff. So I think that was largely, and also to intimidate Marilyn. This whole notion that she was ever going to be imprudent enough to hold a press conference is totally bogus.
No, it wasn't in her nature to be
It
vindictive.
wasn't. She had no history of vengefulness.
No.
The reporters who interviewed her always remarked during her lifetime, she harbored no bitterness. They even asked her and said, one guy said, I'm surprised, Marilyn, you're not bitter. But she wasn't. She said positive things about the people that she had dated and her ex-husband. She said she still loved anybody a little bit, anybody she'd ever loved. You could not draw it out of her. So this is not a careless woman, and her career was uppermost in her mind. She was not going to hold a press conference and destroy her career.
So let's get back to the scene at her house where she's being roughed up, and the neighbors saw a guy with a doctor's bag go in, correct? And then they saw the AG come out and get another guy out of the car.
No, I think that's a little bit reversed. There was a house, and it appears in photos in my book, a 2-story huge house directly next to Marilyn. She actually had one on the other side, but the one that was closest to her bedroom had all these upper floor windows. You could have stood on Marilyn's doorstep and conversed easily with the people at the house next door. They were that close. And one of the photos that is in my book, my first book, shows reporters assembled on Sunday morning in front of her house, and there's the house right there. It was that close. Anyway, there was a group of ladies that were playing cards. I believe they were playing bridge, and several of them spoke out. They noticed the AG arriving with a man they recognized as Peter Lawford coming up a walkway to Marilyn's door. And then at one point, the AG goes back to the car, gets another man who carries a doctor's bag, and he comes up in the afternoon. Now, the interesting aspect of this is, who was that doctor?
Okay, so there was only one guy, not two, that were brought back into the house.
That's
Who
correct.
was the guy with the bag? Was that?
And I have an answer for who it likely was.
Oh, okay.
Hyman Engelberg, because he slipped up in later years and said that he had talked to Marilyn on Saturday afternoon, and there was evidence they'd given her a shot. Oops, when was that? When was that? It has to mean he was there on Saturday afternoon, but that's not part of the official narrative.
Yeah.
I think, and it would be very easy for Peter Lawford, if not the AG, to know who Marilyn's 2 doctors were.
Yeah.
They call him and say, look, we're going to go over there. I got the AG here with me. I'm speaking like Peter Lawford. And, Marilyn's going to be upset about this. You better stand by in case we need you to give her some sedation.
Calm her down. Yeah.
Does anybody think that maybe that might have contributed to what happened to her later in the afternoon?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. So eventually they left.
They left. And upon the
Pardon?
return of Eunice and Norman Jeffries, they found her in a terrible state.
Well, she had called immediately her friend Sidney Wheeleroff.
Not quite yet.
No?
Well, she may have. I tend to think that Eunice and Norman came back first. And while they were preoccupied, Marilyn did make the call to Sidney. But what happened was, when they returned from having left for about an hour, while the Attorney General and Peter Lawford were at Marilyn's house, intimidating her, threatening her, on retrieving the diary and anything else that she had. By the way, she also had tape recordings. She'd hired Fred Otash to equip her the ability to tape record her phone conversations. They may have found that out somehow. Anyway, she was in a terrible state. She was not only intensely angry, she was scared to death. And then Eunice Murray called Ralph Greenson the second time that day and said, you've got to get over here. She's in hysterics. And she did call Sidney Gerloff. Now we need to interject this fact that other people don't know. It's in both of my books. The Reverend Billy Graham awoke one night.
Oh, yeah, I was going to talk about that, and then I didn't put it down. No, I want you to do it. I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, it justifies its corroboration for the phone call that took place with Sidney Gerloff. Billy Graham was a very well-regarded televangelist, and don't apply today's perceptions of these guys to this man. This guy, he never had a scandal. He was a friend of successive presidents, and he had never a financial scandal or anything else. Billy Graham preached to more human beings, I believe, than anybody else in the history of the world. He did these international crusades and attracted massive audiences. But he awoke around midnight one night from a terrible dream forewarning that Marilyn was in mortal danger. And he reached out post midnight to a friend of his, whom I name in the book, and he wanted to get in touch with Marilyn. And the guy said, sorry, she's not seeing anybody. He was believing what was printed in the newspapers. But Billy Graham didn't give up. He called his friend Debbie Reynolds, who was a friend of Marilyn's. She was in Marilyn's phone book and address books. But she thought really it would be a job for Cindy Gilroff, who knew her even better. So Debbie Reynolds reached out to Cindy Gilroff, who first did Marilyn's hair for her first time in front of the camera, her movie camera, way back when. They'd been friends for a very long time. Cindy Gilroff ended up as one of two pallbearers at her funeral. He passed muster even with Joe DiMaggio, who was in charge, and of course the other being Whitey Snyder. But Cindy Gilroff had tried to reach Marilyn, probably Thursday or Friday of that week, and he didn't succeed. But after the Attorney General had been at her home and terrorized her on Saturday afternoon, she thought the one to call would be Sidney because she could confide in him. So she returned Sidney's call, and he talked to her twice. And she told him that the AG had been there and had roughed her up and threatened her. And he was shocked because he knew about her relationship with the big guy, but he didn't know that she'd had any dating relationship. And we do want to clarify that this is not a serious thing really on her part with regard to the AG. In fact, there are indications he took it more seriously than she did. I would be remiss if I did not point out that in all honesty, Marilyn was a bit fickle. She rebounded rather quickly from the breakup of relationships. And I don't care who you're talking about, whether it's Fred Karger during her early movie days or anybody else, she landed on her feet and she was able to carry on.
You know what she was? She was a 21st century woman back, at a time where it was anachronistic. It doesn't surprise me. I think on his part, ego and control were the motivating factors for his situation. Anyway, Eunice returned and said she looked awful. And you mentioned, then you kind of took a little side journey, which I don't think we should do today, but with Mary Pinchot Meyer.
Well, the notion that people wouldn't be concerned about a diary is belied by the fact that Mary Pinchot Meyer was killed over that diary.
That's right. And it's in the book, and I did talk about it too when I did the synopsis. It's a convoluted story. It's really pretty horrifying. So I don't know. Did you want to add anything?
Well, are you talking about Mary Pinchot Meyer, or the senator? Well, she was killed while walking on the C&O Canal towpath, which she did every afternoon. She was a serious paramour of the president. And he had even confided to aides and others that when his term in office ended, he was going to marry this woman. And she kept a diary. She also happened to be the sister-in-law of Ben Bradley of
the paper.
Washington Post. And that so-and-so was willing to let a black man be convicted for a murder, a guy that had been fishing in the area when Mary was shot at point blank range, a shot to the, maybe I shouldn't be saying this.
I don't know. I thought we should sort of just gloss over.
Okay. Anyway, it was an execution style thing, but this black fisherman was arrested. Fortunately, he was acquitted, but the people prosecuting him, prosecutors, withheld crucial exculpatory evidence.
Yeah, well,
and they finally had to present it, and he was let off. Think of a black man getting off the hook for killing a white woman, but he did. So he had nothing to do with this. But it turns out that the night of Mary's murder, Ben Bradley caught James Angleton of the CIA breaking in to Mary's home, and on another occasion, her art studio, trying to retrieve the diary. And the diary was handed over to him.
And so the parallels are really
Yeah,
alarming.
and Ben Bradley, who was called to testify, never mentioned this, never mentioned the diary, kept it hush until he wrote his memoirs 30 some years later. And he wrote that he didn't think it was anybody's business. Oh, but it was the business of the world about anything Nixon did or whatever else it bore down on the public's right to know about Richard Nixon. But here he was literally willing to let a black man take the rap and possibly can be convicted of a crime he did not commit. There was no forensic evidence tying this individual, this black man. And there was a guy that testified, by the way, who was in the military, and he gave testimony that was easy to pick apart. Debbie Roundtree, who was the defense attorney who only died in recent years, lived to be 102. She picked this guy apart. Turns out he claimed to be a professor and so forth at Georgetown. He was totally bogus. Declassified documents showed that that witness against the black man was a CIA operative.
Yeah, and I think that's the link there that we should focus on is that here's a murder connected to the CIA, connected to a diary, connected to the doings of these two highly placed politicians.
It happened after the Warren report came out. Mary Pinchot-Meyer had been married at one point to Cord Meyer, who was still in the CIA, was involved in nefarious plans and projects.
It's too weird.
Mongoose, very high level things.
People say don't believe in conspiracies, but listen to these stories. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So what do we got? We've got
we can talk a little bit about the timeline.
The timeline is crazy. It is so difficult to follow because everybody's lying and they've got six variations of every story.
We can try to synthesize a little bit. Around 5:15, Ralph Greenston went to Marilyn's house. He admits being there until about 7 o'clock. Ralph Roberts called at 6 p.m. to see if Marilyn still wanted to come over, and cook steaks that night, just their own private barbecue. And he was hung up on by Ralph Greenston, who answered the phone. And that made Ralph Roberts very suspicious. But at one point, Pat Newcomb was asked to leave, and supposedly she did, but we're not positive she did.
Well, she left at 3 or at 5 or at 8 or never.
That's true. That's true. The first reports in the press were that Marilyn and Pat Newcomb had dined together around 7 to 8 o'clock that night. Then that was a bit. And Marilyn didn't eat anything at all, according to the autopsy. But what happened was Marilyn did get a call from Joe DiMaggio Jr. Eunice Murray said that took place at 8:30. There were reasons for her wanting to obfuscate 8:30, by the way. It actually took place at 7:15, and we know that because Joe Jr. called Marilyn collect. So it was on her phone bill. So they talked at 7:15.
Well, before that, there were some things that happened. Even before that, there's like a crowd assembling at this house. It's nuts, right? So
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Okay, so the timeline's a mess. So it's hard to nail people down to exactly when they came and when they left.
Well, there were delivery people during the day.
Well, yeah, no. In the evening, after the AG leaves the first time. So you've got Pat Newcomb, who's there or
Still
not
there,
eating or not eating, going on a date or staying home. I mean, it's nuts. Then you've got Dr. Greenson, who was there. When did he arrive and when did he leave? Did he stay? Did he leave at all? We just don't know because there are conflicting stories. Then there's Eunice, who was told to leave and never did. And then there was Jeffries, who was there watching TV.
Yes, he stayed because of the turmoil of the day. And Eunice lingered also. She was asked by Greenson to spend the night, even though she'd technically been fired.
Yeah.
He supposedly was worried about the agitated state that Marilyn was in. And Jeffries hung around for a little while. For one thing, he had to help her kind of retrieve some things that she had still there at the apartment. So Jeffries was in a spare bedroom, a small bedroom across the hall from Marilyn's, watching TV. He was kind of ignoring what else is going on. And being that he was watching TV, he no doubt had the bedroom door shut. So he wasn't privy to all the movements of Eunice and Marilyn during that time frame. But at some point, Pat Newcomb did depart, apparently. Okay, there was a 7:15 call from Joe DiMaggio Jr. He was calling Marilyn to tell her that he had broken up with his fiancée. She was delighted to hear that. Then Greenson claimed he got a call from Marilyn at 7:30 and to report all this. But
there were calls before that.
she had fired Greenson.
Right.
She had fired Greenson by that point.
And you.
But the reason for her call to Greenson at 7:30 was to ask him where her Nembutal was.
Right. Right.
And he claimed he didn't know she was taking Nembutal. He had put her on chloral hydrate.
Chloral hydrate, right.
And he told this to the police. He brought up Nembutal because what better way to make yourself seem less suspicious than to admit that he was puzzled that she was on Nembutal. That way, nobody would suspect that he was the one that actually retrieved the bottle and tampered and caused or precipitated the chain of events that caused her death.
Before that ever happened, though, maybe I have the time confused, but before that ever happened, she called her favorite restaurant and ordered food for dinner.
Yes.
With the AG?
No, God, no. No. Are you kidding? The AG left with his tail between his legs.
Right, but that I got that from the book. So maybe you were asking, could it have been possible, or was somebody?
You'll have to reread the book with all due respect, young lady. What I said in that book.
Are you kidding?
I'm talking about that book.
Are you kidding me?
No. What I reported is that there were two.
Very, very confusing. I'm glad you're here to straighten it out.
The chef, the head chef, and the owner of La Scala, her favorite restaurant, both told stories that concurred in separate interviews that Marilyn had called. Now, one of them, the cook said, I don't know who she was with. The AG, I don't know. He wasn't clear. He was just basing that on
that's
speculation. Okay. He never saw the AG.
Okay.
And no one else has said that the AG hung around. He beat a hasty retreat. Now, I will interject that the AG being a bully, he was not going to just leave and not come back.
Round one.
Plan was hatched for Marilyn to be sedated so the AG could return to her house and search it. We know that from a lot of different little components that all fit together. You know, this is like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
The way I approached this is I took all these pieces and I looked at how they all interrelated and they all mesh. And then a picture emerges.
Yeah.
When he was conferring with Marilyn, Ralph Greenson said, well, you know, you should go out to the beach, go out to the beach. And I got to be careful who I say here, but the AG had called Marilyn after leaving his house, trying to smooth things over. She yelled at him and told him to leave her the hell alone, quit calling her. And then Peter Lawford called her, trying to invite her out to a little gathering at his home.
Yeah, he had guessed that
night. The AG wouldn't even be there, just a few friends. But she was smart enough to not leave her house unattended. So the plan was, they were hoping at first to get her to leave her house, go out to the Lawford residence. By the way, Pat Lawford was visiting Hyannisport. She was not even in town.
Well, didn't Marilyn make a few calls to DC and Hyannisport?
She asked Peter for after Bobby left, and she asked for the phone number of Pat
the older brother.
Pat Lawford. And that's not who she wanted to talk to. She wanted the unlisted number of Hyannisport so she could reach the head guy, the older brother. And Lawford actually told the story the day later that, well, I know Marilyn called and wanted to talk to Pat, my wife, so I gave her the number. Why did he do that? Peter Lawford got out ahead of the story so he could spin the story away from the family. So he volunteered that Marilyn had an interest in reaching Hyannisport by phone.
Yeah, for a different reason.
So there would be a cover story if anybody got the phone bill and said, well, no, wait a minute. Marilyn called Hyannisport just before she died. He would already have said, oh, that was just to reach my wife.
Right.
I'm trying very hard here.
I know it's walking on glass. Isn't it?
Okay,
It's
so
terrible.
anyway, so you're right in that to that extent. There's a sequence of things there. But yes, Marilyn did call Lascella, and we have that based on the owner, and she wanted some antipasta and some other things. And you can understand why. She had not eaten anything all day. Even Eunice Murray attested to that fact, and Norman Jeffries as well. She just snacked on fruit juices. She loved grapefruit juice for whatever reason. And but she had been, and I just have to lay this out there, she had had diarrhea the last weekend of July, another reason why she wasn't leaving town to go anywhere. And that had lingered for a while. And she'd been treated by Dr. Engelberg, prescriptions and his own account.
Oh, good.
But then the pendulum swung too far in the other direction. And she had a problem of constipation, which is why she was not eating anything that last day. So she needed relief. How would she get relief? Well, she had a long history based on receipts of using fleet enemas.
And we should say that kind of side effect is the result of the sleeping medication.
Yes.
Barbiturates tend to bind you up. Yeah.
Right. But a fleet enema, for anybody that doesn't know, is a little bottle, almost like a nasal spray bottle, a little nozzle on one end, take the cap off. It's designed to be self-administered. It's an opaque bottle. She bought them by the dozen. I'm not kidding. She bought them from the door. I have receipts showing she bought fleet enemas, which was not uncommon. There would be beautiful actresses that would do that before photo shoots and so forth. So,
can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Because the minute I read that, I'll tell you what came to my mind. Bulimia. And bulimia doesn't always mean overeating. It could be the misuse of laxatives and enemas.
let's not assign that to her too. We're going to get people talking.
No, I'm just saying that it's very unusual.
She wasn't
and
carrying
there's an explanation because of her medication, but at the same time, if you're ordering Fleet's enemas in bulk, there may be
taking it often enough. But I had a family member, a relative, who had chronic problems. He was not taking any drugs, but some people just have that. She also had things like endometriosis. She had a number of health issues that could exacerbate her problems. But anyway, she needed to take a fleet enema, and I think that she was going to do that, but order food to be delivered at a certain time that evening because she was famished. She was hungry. She wanted to eat. So she was going to get this fleet enema out of the way, which was quick acting. Then she could sit back and enjoy that meal. She sure as hell was not going to be goaded into going over to Peter Lawford's house where she suspected the AG was hanging out, or suspected that the AG was going to come to her house and pilfer through her things while she was gone. So that's what happened. And to take that fleet enema, she needed to do that in the guest cottage, which, remember, had just been remodeled.
And there was no water turned on in the house.
And running water.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is where it gets interesting because it was pre-planned, I believe, that Marilyn was not going to survive the night. And I believe that Peter Lawford was in this up to his bushy eyebrows.
Allegedly.
It's just my opinion. I could be 100% wrong, but.
Well, people talk.
But I wouldn't make that statement if it weren't for his multitude of outright lies.
Oh, yeah.
He did himself. He's on the record as doing that. So.
Yeah, well, a perfect example. Here's the opportunity to prove it a lie, flagrant lie. He had guests at his house for dinner, and during the dinner, he got a call. Or maybe he made the call, I don't remember, but Marilyn Monroe was on the other end, and there was a conversation, and it was overheard by all the guests at the table, and later he denied he ever had that call.
Well, what he said, excuse me, I'm losing my voice after 9 hours of talking here. What he said was, oh, that's just Marilyn again. She had called him to tell him she wasn't going to come to his party because he called her earlier, and he was nonchalant. His housekeeper and the three guests that he had, the Nars, Joe Nar and his wife, and AAR, and Bullets Durgan. Those were really the only three guests he had there that night. They said he displayed no concern about Marilyn at all. But the later story emerged that, oh, he was panic stricken. He was talking to her on the phone and her voice trailed
Worried
off.
about her well-being.
He was so worried that he called Milt Evans, his manager, and said, try to get in touch with somebody. Mind you, he thought she was ending her life.
Yeah.
But he thought he'd waste some time. He lived 4 miles away. How long would it take to get
crazy? Yeah.
Or he could have called an ambulance and police. But he calls his manager, and his manager calls Mickey Rudin, who was at a party. He reached him through his answering service, and Mickey Rudin called around 8:30, according to his account, and inquired. Now, by the way, Peter Lawford said he tried to call Marilyn back after, she faded away, her voice faded away, and the line was busy, so he couldn't call back. Why did he think anybody else would have better success in calling?
Before any of those calls got made, if I got the timeline correct, at around 8 o'clock, she finished her call with Sidney Guileroff.
Yes.
About 8:30,
Ralph
Roberts got a phone call.
Yeah, we kind of left the Sydney thing. I want to come back to this. Let me digress for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
We warned you all that it was complicated, but Sidney talked to her twice. He talked to her when she returned his call, and he was just so shocked. He tried to convince Marilyn to come to his home that night for safety, and she didn't do so. But she did give him a full accounting of what had transpired at her house. Sidney was absolutely credible on that. This is not a publicity hound. He was a conservative guy, the first man to ever get screen credits for doing hair. He designed the hairstyles of any actress you could name, practically. Really, a well-regarded man. And then he had another conversation. He called her back after Greenson had been there. That was around 8 o'clock that he called her back. She was calmer. And so he proposed that they get together the next day at the Holiday House, which is a hangout for celebs along the Intercoastal Highway. Not Intercoastal Highway, the Pacific Coast Highway. And so that's kind of where they left it. And she said, just in a casual way, Sidney, I know a lot of secrets about the family. And he said, well, what kind of secrets? And she said, dangerous ones. That was around 8 o'clock. Okay, then she makes it to the guest cottage, and she is self-administering the fleet enema. And a phone call is placed to Ralph Roberts' answering service around 8:30 by a fuzzy-voiced woman. She left no message, but there are only 2 other women that he had given that number to, and he contacted both of them, and neither one of them tried to call him. So
process of elimination, it had to be her.
Right. And around that same general time, 8:30, 8:45, Mickey Rudin had called, who was kind of, out of the loop in a way, called because he'd gotten a call from Milt Evans, who had gotten a call from Lawford, who supposedly was concerned about Marilyn. I believe that was all staged.
Yeah, to make it look like she was a threat to herself, right?
Right. And so Mickey Rudin reached Eunice, and he curiously made note of the fact that when he reached her, he had no trouble getting through on the line. He reached her in the guest cottage.
Yeah, he let that slip.
That was a little fact that was unnecessary to his story. How did he know she was in the guest cottage? I'm talking about Eunice. And why did he make note of it? But he wanted it on the record. Eunice Murray was in the guest cottage at 8:30. But remember, we had Eunice telling the press that Joe DiMaggio Jr. called at 8:30 at the residence.
Yeah, and she was sitting in the hallway talking on the phone.
Mickey Rudin said that he asked about Marilyn's health. Was she all right? And Eunice put the phone down for 4 or 5 minutes. And when she came back, she said everything was all right. But Mickey commented and said, I got the impression she never even left the phone to go check. Well, Eunice was aware that Marilyn was falling under the influence. Now, I'm not sure how we're going to insert this, but around the time these concurrent things are evolving, do you want to talk about the enema and what was done with that enema? The doctor.
Well, there's
Marilyn's enema was
speculation,
doctored.
yeah.
And it was doctored by Dr. Greenson.
Yeah, we're
my
never going to be able
accusation.
to prove it, but yeah, why don't you talk about that? Because I think it's really important.
Dr. Ralph Greenson's daughter, Joan, said in the aftermath of Marilyn's death, trying to portray her father as such a great physician, so concerned about his patient, let it slip that he used to tamper with her medication, unbeknownst to Marilyn. And she said if he thought that she was getting too much medication, he would surreptitiously, while at her house, open up her pill bottle and empty some of it out. Now, she could not mean that he emptied out capsules, whole capsules, because Marilyn would have noticed that the bottle was half empty. She'd just go get a prescription refilled. So what clearly was implied here was that he was opening up the capsules.
Yeah, this is pre-Tylenol days.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the capsules would come apart. They were powder inside for Nebutol.
Yeah.
They were also had a dye, a yellow dye on the outside of them. And he would empty out capsules, put them back together, put them back in the bottle, screw the lid back on, and Marilyn was none the wiser. So he is my suspect number one for having tampered with Marilyn's medication. And think of how easy it would be. He knew, Pat Newcomb knew, and Eunice knew that Marilyn was going to do a fleet enema. They were all in her house. They knew that. That was really no embarrassing secret. So Ralph Greenson, I believe, took that bottle of Nebutol that Marilyn couldn't find, and while he was in the bathroom, he emptied out some of the contents of the fleet enema, because it was an opaque bottle, opened up some capsules, put it in there, shook it up, put the lid back on, put it back on the shelf, and poor Marilyn didn't have any idea that fleet enema she was going to self-administer was doctored.
And I think it's important to mention at this point that we don't want to get too much ahead, but in her autopsy, there were signs that she had some sort of caustic, acidic irritation
At
in
a
her
point
bowel.
higher up.
Yeah.
Which would be
and
where,
the only way you could explain it.
And Nebutol had acidic properties.
Mm-hmm.
So if she used that and squeezed that bottle, it would jettison up to the part of her anatomy that had a purplish discoloration, which was an anomaly for anybody. And by the way, not just anybody. Dr. Cyril Wecht, called the godfather of forensic pathology, who praised my work for my meticulous and extensive research.
Yeah, he's wonderful. Yeah.
I have him on tape saying that also. But anyway, even he said, this all makes sense when I'm describing it to you. So here she is. And she would have expelled just by reaction. All of a sudden, there's this burning sensation.
Yeah, it would have been
internally.
terrible. Yeah.
So normally you would hold that liquid within you.
Yeah.
But this time, you'd expel it like that. So I believe that didn't do it. That didn't finish her off.
She didn't absorb enough of the Nebutol.
But it did absorb enough that she was woozy enough and was somewhat in and out. And she was still arousable by the time the AG returned between 9:30 and 10.
And she would have been incapacitated enough at the beginning to recognize that there was something wrong, and she would have made that phone call.
Right. And what's significant about 9:30? Well, Bolitz Durgan, who is an informal house guest for a little Chinese takeout meal at Lawford's house, said he would never forget that Pat Newcomb showed up wearing a pair of pajamas and a raincoat.
So strange, yeah.
Even though it was not raining that day. At Lawford's residence, she stood at the bottom of the staircase and shouted up to Peter, Marilyn's not going to be coming, Peter. She's not feeling well. Hell, he already knew that. Marilyn had informed her himself. And why would he persist in thinking that she was doing away with herself? And if he had made those calls in genuine concern, aside from the fact he should have gone over there or alerted people, he certainly was relieved of that notion by the report back from Mickey Reed, and that, oh, I called over there and she's just fine. Talked to you this morning. So you see the timing is all screwed up. But why was it important for Pat Nickum to go over there and make that statement at 9:30? Because I believe that was the signal.
It was a coded message.
Clear, and the AG could return.
Right.
And that's indeed what Norman Jeffries said he did. Now, it's interesting. You compare notes. You got Bill Sturgeon and you got Norman Jeffries both talking about this time frame. And by 10 o'clock, the AG was there, and he was there with two men. And again, Eunice and Norman were told to leave. This time they did not leave the neighborhood. They only walked to a neighbor, according to Norman Jeffries. They were very concerned about it. Now, who could that be? It wasn't the house next door with the tall, the second story. They went next door to the gentleman. You have the name there. It's escaped my notice at the moment, but he was also a professor, and he was out for the evening with his wife.
I didn't write his name down.
Right next door. And I want to say Abe Fortas, but then he was a Supreme Court justice, so it wasn't him. But anyway, he was also a professor. And I believe that Eunice and Norman went next door and probably just sat on lawn furniture or sat on the front porch. So they were, within earshot. And they were in a position because Marilyn lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, very short little street, the size of an alley. Literally, even to this day, it's so narrow. If you meet another car, it's hard to squeeze by.
You have to pull over, yeah.
And so they would have been in a position to see that car containing the two men leave Marilyn's residence because it had to go right past them. And upon their return, they found her guest cottage room door open, and her little dog in the doorway barking in panic. They walked in, they found Marilyn, note this, in the guest cottage, face down, had a phone in her hand, and she looked terrible. And
okay, this is a good place to start. We have less than a minute, so let me hit the button here. The perils of Pauline, a cliffhanger here, right? I'll just add one more thing, that Peter Lawford lied later to police or whoever that Pat Nickum had ever shown up with this announcement in her pajamas with a coat over it. And the thing is, the dinner guests all saw her and heard the conversation. She just came into the room in front of everybody. We can take
you through this sequentially. We'll be prepared next time to do it.
It's difficult because there are conflicting reports from people about what they were doing and what time they did it. They conflict with their previous statements.
Yes, exactly.
And with other people's.
Right. That's the point. You can't trust somebody that can't keep their story straight.
Right. But it makes it very hard to come up with a timeline. I think that's also intentional, because how do you pin people down and have collect any kind of evidence when it's ephemeral? Things are changing constantly. Yeah.
This case gets juicy. This is unbelievable what we're ready to
do. We're at a cliffhanger. We're at a place that is really difficult to believe. And I particularly am horrified, and we won't give any details away, but I'm particularly horrified at the testimony of the ambulance driver. But
who is credible?
100%.
Provably credible.
100%. Yeah. So come back. Don't give up now on the story. Come back to hear the rest of it, because it is really a remarkable story, and it's not the mainstream narrative, and yet there's proof that this is the real unfolding that happened.
If you don't want to wade through the big book, get this one. I'm telling you. Silenced. New evidence in the suspicious death of Marilyn Monroe.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes, so I'm watching the clock. So why don't you just very quickly mention your next project?
Oh, I'm doing a book. I actually have two books. One is on Ronald Reagan and a look at his presidency. It's not flattering. But a book that's going to come out before then, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, will be a book on George Reeves, the original Superman. Interestingly, there's a parallel, surprisingly so, in a lot of the things that happened in his death and what happened in Marilyn's death.
Yeah.
I mean, the crossover is amazing.
So I'm going to interrupt you
Calling
because
the
we're running
police,
out of
et cetera, et
time.
cetera. Yeah.
We won't be able to get shot
Yeah.
shorts. If you're interested in George Reeves, before you buy the book when it comes out, I made a video about what happened, and then Deborah Lupien and I did a separate video about what really happened, and it's fascinating. You'll want to read the book. So that's what we've got for today. Thank you so much, Larry. I feel like I've completely exhausted you, and I'm sorry. I really
I'm gonna go take a nap now, Helen.
Please just let it be a nap. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and many, many thanks to Larry. And we will come back and tie up this story for you in the near future, as soon as we can. Right? You have to recover. So, thanks, everybody. Slán go fóill and sláinte.